Well, 2024 will be remembered for being one of the more wild weather years on record, with lots of tornadoes, severe weather, and tropical weather as well. Now, as we head into winter 2024 and 2025, let's take a look at another review on what may be on the table for us by looking at various analogs, potential signals in the climate to kind of show us what we might be talking about in terms of a tornado threat, where we'll likely see the highest threat of tornadoes, where maybe getting a bit of a break this winter after, again, what has been already a pretty wild, like 12 months of weather. I think some places could use a little bit of a break. I'm meteorologist Nick Stewart. Thanks for tuning in. Maybe grab yourself a beverage, because this will be a bit of a long haul. Lots of graphics, lots of data. I hope you're into that sort of thing. Let's just jump right into it, shall we? So first and foremost, the winter outlook of 24 and 25. We did see a lot of tornadoes right here on the channel as well. We streamed them live, lots of documentaries. If you're into more severe weather video, we have that here on the channel. Feel free to subscribe and check out some of my other videos. Let's talk a little bit first about my 2024 recap. We did a forecast for that as well. Again, kind of looking at analogs, not necessarily a forecast per se, but kind of a tool in terms of what may be on the table, right? So here's what it looks like. On the left side of your screen, that's a verification for the H500 pattern. You can kind of see the overall pattern. Part of the reason why things were so active is big troughiness in the western United States. The analogs that I did pick out for this particular season, 1973, 83, 88, 95, 98, 2005, 7, 10, and 16, all kind of show that kind of similar pattern, big troughiness in the central and western US. I think the analog years were a little bit more rambunctious than in verification, but overall the general pattern did kind of match. In terms of the precipitation outlook, there's your left verification for spring. On the right was our analog forecast. We did have some hits. You can see the state of Iowa, around the Mississippi into eastern Nebraska, did pick up some above normal precipitation. New England picked up a lot of precipitation as well. And you can also see the southeast was a pretty big target as well. That was one of the bigger areas that really showed up at the analogs as being an area to watch. One big miss, and this will translate into the severe weather as well. The central plains and the high plains really missed out on a lot of the precipitation. The analog years were looking pretty good. The severe weather threat was looking pretty high. We didn't really see that, and that was one of the misses with the analog forecast. Again, this is not necessarily a forecast, but just kind of a tool. In terms of the tornado anomalies, on the left side of the screen, this is the data that's coming directly from the DAT, the Damage Assessment Toolkit, from SPC and weather.gov. So if there are tornadoes not on the DAT, it's not being applied here on the averages. Just want to point that out. On the right was our forecast, March through June. On the left, that's what actually happened compared to the 2013 through 2023 mean. And again, we had some hits. Ohio in particular, we did talk about that potential for warm fronts kind of stalling out there south of the Great Lakes with those cooler temperatures and more ice. That was a bit of an issue there. We did see that higher hit there in Ohio. That actually matches really well if you really look at it pixel for pixel. The other big hit, or almost I guess you could call it a miss in terms of severe weather, was the southeast. We really didn't have a whole lot of episodes across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. That was a bit of an area that saw a reduction in that severe weather threat. We didn't really see that active season, March and April, and that was reflected in our analog forecast. Misses, I mean, this almost is all due to like one weekend or 1 week of events, but that eastern Nebraska, western Iowa, yeah, that did not show up very well in the analog at all. But again, that was one particular event that really kind of pushed that up. And again, that western Kansas was a bit of a miss as well. So low. Now let's go into the winter kind of forecast, looking at the analogs, kind of picking them out. One of the bigger drivers, as always, is La Nina or El Nino. Looking forward, we are forecasting a La Nina, a fairly weak La Nina based on some of the guidance. The trends have been weaker with La Nina and later with La Nina onset going into the wintertime. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. There is the official forecast coming in from Columbia University Climate School. You can see the probabilities of going into La Nina are pushing about 70%, centered around December, January. So winter should be La Nina, but again, it might be a bit on the weaker side of things. The other thing I was kind of really looking at for the wintertime was the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, kind of looking at where we were averaged out August, September, and October. That's us in the far right. The analog years I'm picking out are in the red, and those are kind of years that are pretty similar matches for the NAO, as well as the ENSO pattern we're likely talking about. Other things to look at, North Pacific Ocean off the west coast of the United States. Temperatures are definitely above normal, but there is a bit of an area of some cooler temperatures there in the Gulf of Alaska. That's something that we might be looking at. The Gulf of Mexico is running warm, to say the least, especially the northern Gulf of Mexico. That might have some impacts on the severe weather. So here are our analog years. The winter seasons of 61, 62, 67, 68, 85, 86, 05, 06, and 08, 09. Those are the analog seasons that we'll be likely comparing against the 2024-2025. The forecast for this pattern, again, it's a weak La Nina, down to about minus 0.5. Looking at the ENSO cycles for the analogs, minus 0.2, minus 0.6, minus 0.5, minus 0.8, minus 0.7. So all generally close to neutral, if not weak La Nina, but on the cooler side of that. And the leading precursor, that NAO going into the winter season, we're looking at right now 0.395, pretty close to 0.4. That's fairly high. Some of the leading NAOs for the analog years, 0.34, 0.38, 0.38, 0.28, and 0.4. So that is kind of how we are defining our analog years this time around. Let's talk about the reanalysis. This is looking at the climate, looking at our analog years. On the left, that is your H500 pattern. Kind of looks pretty cool, right? That eastern CONUS looks pretty chilly, all things considered. That's a pretty big trophy pattern over the eastern US. That looks pretty cold. That's a bit of an interesting thing when you look at the analog years, because there's a lot of consistency in those analog years as well. Top right, that's your 2-meter temperature anomalies. You can see there's definitely some cooler temperatures there across the Great Lakes. Very interesting to look at. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing on the bottom right, that's your instability or CAPE. And you can kind of see we're seeing some higher anomalies there in the southeast US, likely contributed a bit towards a warmer Gulf of Mexico. Also where that trough is setting up, kind of ejecting out potentially over the southeast US. I think you're starting to pick up on what I might be showing here in a little bit. In terms of the individual seasons, very kind of locked in a similar pattern. The one outlier here is 1967, 1968. You can actually see the pattern's a bit weird there, kind of more zonal across the United States for that pattern. All the other years, though, in terms of our analogs, do show kind of a big cool down, big trophiness, and big cooler pattern across the eastern CONUS. Looking at some of the climate models compared to our analog year, they don't really differ too much. I do think the analog is a bit farther south with that kind of bullseye, but generally speaking, the patterns are all kind of there. Let's talk about the precipitation, what that is looking like. There's a lot of brown there, a lot of below normal precipitation rates across much of the central US, eastern US as well. Not great given just how much drought there is across much of the area. In the southeast United States, we also are looking at some above normal precipitation values. So that precipitation rate, that's a bit interesting when you think of a La Nina winter. The southeast tends to be on the drier side of things, but our analog years are maybe a little bit different than that. Just kind of something to point out. I also want to bring up the northern Dakotas into the Great Lakes, some above normal precipitation traits there. There are all of your 5 seasons, your analog years. Overall, they're pretty in sync. Nothing really stands out in terms of the individual years. The only thing that I'll kind of point out is Florida might actually be a bit more active. There's some higher precipitation levels there than I would have thought for a La Nina winter. So here are the official NOAA models. Here's kind of what they're showing for the seasonal outlook. They're showing that below normal precipitation for the southern, basically half of the CONUS, with above normal up there around the Great Lakes. Again, not too far off from our analogs. Our analogs are kind of hinting at maybe a little bit more precipitation there across areas like southern Alabama and Mississippi. Just kind of something to look at. Also, the chances for below normal precipitation are higher over, you can see, southern Georgia, northern Florida, but in our analog, those are actually lesser chances for below normal. So it's just kind of something to point out. In terms of temperatures, you can see above normal for much of the southern and eastern U.S. I don't think that's too far gone. When you look at, again, our analog on the left versus on the right, the current models, the CFS going out that range, you can kind of see there's kind of a somewhat of a similar trait there with kind of the cooler temperatures there in the northern Dakotas. I do think maybe the analogs are overdoing just how cool the eastern U.S. will be, but we'll talk about that later. Not really going to spend too much time here. Again, you can kind of see what the climate models are looking at for precipitation and temperatures for each month. That's December, January, February. Not a lot to look at there. In terms of the Gulf of Mexico analogs, we're looking at northern Gulf, warmer temperatures, not surprised. The Pacific, that's a bit interesting to look at the analog years because our analogs are kind of a bit cooler along the western U.S. I do think, though, that that northern portion of the eastern Pacific around the Gulf of Alaska, that cool down, though, I do think is something to point out. That did show up in the analog. So here is, without further ado, what the actual tornado analogs look like. This is, again, the tornado outlook for 2024-2025 winter, looking at our analog winters of 61, 62, 67, 68, 85, 86, 2005, 2006, and 2008, 2009. Just when you kind of just glance at it and look at it in full, some things that do kind of stand out to me right away are kind of the active areas there. Eastern portions of Alabama into much of Georgia. The Carolinas look a bit active as well. And then the other thing to kind of notice is kind of the downward trend again showing up in eastern Texas, much of Arkansas to Louisiana. So that southern Mississippi River Valley looks maybe a bit on the lesser side of active compared to the southeast. And if you think about the overall H500 pattern, eastern CONUS kind of in that trough, you kind of would have kind of some of that air kind of coming in from the northwest, drier air, northwesterly flow, cooler, drier air, and then the trough kind of base right here across the southeast US. That is where you can get maybe some higher end shear here, pulling in some more moisture as well. The warmer Gulf of Mexico, maybe pulling in some of that, some higher instability. So there are some things to kind of look at there that are kind of interesting from the tornado perspective. So again, I think the biggest highlights there are the kind of active pattern here, Alabama, Georgia, into the Carolinas, with lesser activity here across the southern Mississippi River Valley. The other thing that I do think is a bit interesting here, California is kind of showing up. I don't know what that's really about. I can't imagine there's a lot of cases in the analogs that we're really looking at there, but that I do find that a bit interesting there in California. There's kind of several cases showing up there. Again, I think some of the bigger drivers when you look at the CONUS in the eastern, southeastern United States, again, the reanalysis data in the analog years showing that Cape values being a bit higher there. I think, again, the warmer Gulf of Mexico with kind of the trough axis kind of sitting there, maybe pulling in some more moisture, some warmer temperatures, that could be kind of influencing why that area might be a bit more active. Here are all your analog seasons. Your 5 seasons, again, with the total average on the bottom right. The way we run this, again, if you are new to this, the way we run this are looking at the SPC tornado data, so not the report, but the actual data, the real tornado reports, and we compare it to the decade that surrounds that year. For example, what I'm talking about is like 1961-62, the amount of tornadoes that are captured on cell phones and stuff didn't exist compared to, say, 2008, 2009. So we normalize our outlook here to the surrounding decade to kind of get a better idea of how that particular season relates to the surrounding seasons in the immediate vicinity. And again, there are some standouts here. You can kind of see 61, 62, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, 67, 68, kind of a similar story right along the Gulf Coast, panhandle of Florida kind of showing up as well. 85, 86 really did not show a lot here. Again, that's kind of a bit of an outlier year, although look at Florida from the Tampa area. That kind of is an interesting kind of standout there. 05, 06, once again hinting at that Georgia, South Carolina. 08, 09, kind of a similar story. Georgia, Alabama, and then again, there's your total average. So that's kind of how things are shaping up there. Kind of interesting, don't you think? I'm not totally surprised just based on the data that I've been looking at. I think that actually does seem to make out pretty good. When you look at the actual tornado reports that come in, I can kind of see all the different reports from each of the analog seasons, and then all of them kind of overlap there. And you can kind of see, you know, it's wintertime. You don't expect Central Plains and Northern Plains tornado outbreaks. That doesn't happen. But you can kind of see 85, 86, again, a bit of an outlier there compared to all the other years. But a lot of years kind of hinting at, again, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina. I'm going to end with this. Again, this is kind of a look again at the cumulative tornado reports as we go from day 1, which is December 1st, through the end of the season. The black line, that is the 1981 to 2010, basically a cumulative average averaged out there. And those are each of the analog years. And what you can kind of see is 08, 09 is above normal. You can kind of see that 67, 68 is above normal, 05, 06. But again, I think some of this is kind of related to the fact that the more modern years, you're going to have more reports. So if you kind of compare it to the surrounding decade, when you look at total reports in the US from December 1st through February 28th, that respective winter season, all the analog years are above normal. And when you normalize it, the tornado counts are about 20 to 30 above normal. So, you know, there might be a signal there. They also all kind of get active pretty early. You can kind of see here by, you know, day 30, which is, you know, end of December, 4 out of the 5 years are already running above normal. Maybe a sign that winter may get off to a bit of a quick start. So just something to keep in mind as we go forward. A lot of fun data to look at, to say the least. So thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you found it interesting. If you like these kind of seasonal climate outlooks, severe weather outlooks, please let me know in the comments down below. Maybe I'll do them more frequently, either on a monthly basis, or maybe I'll do every season. You know, spring coming up, we'll do summer, autumn, all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in more severe weather coverage, we do have documentaries and storm chasing live right here on the channel. If you like some of the artwork that's behind me, by the way, shameless plug, you can find the links down below for some of the stores to find some of the prints and stuff, canvases, metal prints, all that kind of stuff. I don't know, I think they look kind of cool. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Please subscribe if you haven't already. If you're interested in more content like this, like the video if you haven't already liked it as well. If you liked it, of course. And we'll see you again at the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching.